What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're taking a look at our second NFL mock draft of the season. And as you would expect with NFL free agency in full effect, now's a great time to go ahead and revisit some of these selections, as there's been a lot of key NFL free agent pickups and also some trades in the first round in terms of picks. And that leads to a lot of changes compared to our first mock draft, as you would expect. Now, just for the sake of continuity, I'm going to go ahead and abstain from making trades in the first round here one last time, because we're still pretty early on into free agency, only about 5 days in. I still expect some big names to be dealt, to be signed, but next go around in our third version of this mock draft, we're going to have trades aplenty, so don't worry. In the meantime, let's get right into it. We kick things off with the first pick overall, where the Cincinnati Bengals select quarterback Joe Burrow. And like we've said since day one, this will be the clear-cut pick at the top of the draft. I almost feel like nothing else needs to be said here. But look, we all know the deal. Burrow, the local kid from Ohio, going to go to Cincinnati. He was dominant from the first week of the college football season all the way to his victory in the national championship game. He could have gone ahead and skipped the NFL Combine, and he still would be the clear-cut number one pick. The only maybe point of interest right now is that the Bengals still haven't dealt Andy Dalton. Will they go ahead and have moved on from him by the time the draft comes around? If not, doesn't really matter. Burrow is still the guy. Andy Dalton has a foot out of the door already. I believe worst case scenario, he's going to go ahead and be a backup for the Bengals, kind of a mentor for Joe Burrow if they have struggles moving him. But I do think that won't be the case, and it will be Joe Burrow's team completely come April. At number 2, the Washington Redskins select defensive end Chaisson. No changes here either, as the Redskins elect to go with the top overall prospect in the entire draft and strengthen that defensive line. But I will point out, however, since our first mock draft, where we highlighted that don't count out the Redskins going quarterback, and I think we were one of the first people to go ahead and do that, wouldn't you know it, since then, that type of buzz has started to grow pretty rapidly for the Redskins, and for two simple reasons. One is that Dwayne Haskins didn't look all that convincing in his first year, but more importantly is the fact that there's a new head coaching staff in Washington. Ron Rivera probably wants to get his own guy, and Tua will be there at the number 2 pick. The question becomes is, do you want to go ahead and invest in a guy that has got that injury history, maybe a little bit of a question mark, or maybe you play it out with Dwayne Haskins one more year? Washington probably going to be a team that, unfortunately for the Redskins fans, struggles again in 2020 and might be picking at the top of the first 5 picks in next year's draft. Now, obviously, there's a lot of factors that will go into that, but if that's the case, which I'm kind of trying to look at it long term, I think the Redskins potentially be in the picture of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes then. And from that perspective, he's a little bit safer, maybe higher ceiling, definitely doesn't have the injury history of Tua. So that's an option there. I'd love to hear from the Redskins fans and what they think about this. Is it really Chaisson, no questions asked? Or is there an option with the quarterback selection here? Has that all been smoke? What do you guys think? What do you guys want to see? Next at number 3, the Detroit Lions select defensive back Jeff Okudah. And I really do believe that this is where this year's draft truly begins, because the Lions could go a number of different ways here. Personally, I think it'll be on the defensive side of the football, but it could be anywhere from the defensive line to the linebacker all the way to the DBs. And the reason I'm going with the defensive backs is because of the recent departure that everyone expected of Darius Slay to the Eagles. Now, sure, the Lions went ahead and signed Desmond Trufant after he was let go by the Falcons, but it was only on a 2-year contract, so not long-term intention-wise, it looks like. I think Jeff Okudah could be that guy. They still need some help there, some filler pieces, and he sure seems like a longer-term solution than Trufant. Maybe pick up some things from Trufant while he's still there, but I think long-term Okudah will be the face of this Detroit secondary. At number 4, the New York Giants select offensive lineman Mekhi Becton. And similar to before, I've got the Giants addressing the offensive line only it's a different name this time around because Becton had a hell of a combine, shot up draft boards, and as a result could very well be the first offensive lineman to be selected. I realize Giants fans might be clamoring for a name like an Isaiah Simmons or at least before free agency, someone in the secondary, but with the addition of James Bradberry, that probably isn't an option anymore. The linebacker level was also addressed in free agency. To me, that leaves the offensive line as one of the bigger needs, and it's a good fit here as well. Becton, inserted day one, helps protect Daniel Jones and also open up holes for Saquon Barkley, the best of both worlds for the New York Giants, and it also checks the list of those hog mollies that Dave Gettleman loves to target in the trenches. At number 5, the Miami Dolphins select quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. And for the Dolphins, this is a perfect scenario. They stay put, they still get their guy, and they don't have to give up draft capital. But I will say this is definitely a result of the fact that we don't have any trades in this draft, because if that was the case, then the Dolphins would definitely be a prime candidate to move up, as will likely be the case come April. I will say, however, if you're trying to find a scenario as unlikely as it might be why the Dolphins could stay put and still land Tua, I would point to the current sports landscape and say the fact that visits with draft prospects aren't happening and medical staff isn't readily being able to go ahead and evaluate these guys could work in favor of the Dolphins, but I still think there will be enough teams that would want to kick the tires on Tua, even with the question marks he has medically. One way or another, I still believe Tua will be a top 5 pick, and with that being the case, right now his landing spot more than likely is the Dolphins. At number 6, the LA Chargers select quarterback Jordan Love, and probably our first big shock of the draft, but maybe it really isn't, because there's a growing sentiment that Love could very well be the third quarterback chosen ahead of Justin Herbert. The hype is real surrounding Love here, folks. He had a good combine, and anytime you're compared to future Patrick Mahomes, you better believe that's going to skyrocket your draft capital. Love will likely require a year to sit and learn, but the potential is there. Now, I personally, right now, still have the Chargers going quarterback, but that could change. Maybe they go ahead and get a guy like Cam Newton or Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton and give them a longer-term contract so that their need for quarterback isn't as high as it was before. And I do believe that there is a bit of a drop-off after Burrow and Tua to guys like Love and Justin Herbert, wherever your preference lies. I wouldn't be shocked if this pick is maybe on the offensive line after the departure of Russell Okung. So again, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the Chargers are going quarterback, but as free agency currently sits, that is a huge need for the Chargers. And with the draft capital and the noise that Jordan Love is making, this move makes sense. Next to number 7, the Carolina Panthers select defensive lineman Derrick Brown. And right now, I'm baffled by the moves that the Panthers have made in free agency. Not so much by saying that Cam Newton will be traded. That was expected. We all knew that they were going to rebuild, and they hadn't really committed to Cam Newton, but more so the contract they gave to Teddy Bridgewater. Personally, I don't think that that was warranted given the small sample size of Bridgewater in only 5 games. And the fact that the Panthers, well, as a young team with a new head coach, you would think that maybe they'd like to go ahead and kick the tires if they really wanted a quarterback for the future on someone younger, someone like a Jordan Love, or maybe Trevor Lawrence next year. But that not being the focal point of this pick, let's get back to the fact that defensively, this is a team that needs a lot of help. You could make a case that defensively they need help at every single position. On the defensive line, though, I think that's where the biggest holes are, and Derrick Brown, a lot of people believe, is the next best prospect after Chase Young. To me, after losing Vernon Butler, Dontari Poe, Gerald McCoy, you better believe that you need to add another piece at the defensive tackle. Linebacker Isaiah Simmons, also a possibility, but again, I warn people, he will not be a Luke Kuechly replacement. There is no Luke Kuechly in this year's draft. The guy was once in a generation type of talent. And with Isaiah Simmons, I keep saying it. What position will he play? He keeps getting comparisons to guys like Jamal Adams or Derwin James. Guess what? Those guys are safeties. People are projecting him to be a linebacker. That's my main worry for Isaiah Simmons. You could potentially make the case that cornerback is also a huge area of need after the departure of James Bradberry. But again, unless Jeff Okudah is here, you probably don't look at the cornerback position. Wide receiver, also a big area of need. After DJ Moore, who else do the Panthers have? You invested a lot of money in Teddy Bridgewater. Well, he doesn't have all that many weapons, so you could argue that the Panthers could target a guy like Jerry Jeudy or someone like a CeeDee Lamb. Offensive line could also use some work after trading away Trey Turner for an older Russell Okung, more expensive at that as well. So a lot of question marks for the Panthers during free agency. I'm still going with Derrick Brown because I think that's their biggest area of need. I think he's the next best available player. And for that reason, it's a match that makes sense. Next, at number 8, the Arizona Cardinals select offensive lineman Tristan Wirfs. And boy, oh boy, did the Cardinals make a splash to begin free agency as they traded for DeAndre Hopkins of all people. And on top of that, they didn't have to give up a first-round pick, and they were able to unload the contract of David Johnson, a running back who's been injured for the last couple of years. So basically, the streak of taking advantage of Bill O'Brien and the Houston Texans continues. Now, Tristan Wirfs, getting back to the selection itself, he's a guy that measured absolutely off the charts, setting records at the offensive line position. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me if he's the first overall offensive lineman taken off the board. So he is a guy that's, I think, almost 100% going to be a top 10 selection. The question is where. Right now I've got him going to the Cardinals. I will say it's very tempting to, again, go wide receiver here, because imagine the wide receiver room that the Cardinals would then have. DeAndre Hopkins, Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and then CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy on top of that. That would be insane. But I'm going with the more measured approach, a little bit more boring, but probably better long term, as the Cardinals elect to protect their quarterback and give him time to exploit defenses with his newly added weapon in DeAndre Hopkins for years to come. At number 9, the Jacksonville Jaguars select linebacker Isaiah Simmons. And maybe not as big of a need as it once was, considering that the Jaguars just gave a big contract to Joe Schobert in free agency. The fact remains is that Simmons will be a very versatile defensive player. Notice I said linebacker, but teams will have their own choice to make how they utilize him, what type of packages they put him in. But right now, he is the best overall prospect available on my big board. He had a great combine. He is a freak of nature athletically, and the Jaguars have a bunch of needs defensively. They've lost guys pretty much at every single level, and adding someone with the athleticism that Isaiah Simmons has will be a welcomed addition. So right now, Simmons is a steal from that perspective for the Jaguars. At number 10, the Cleveland Browns select offensive lineman Jedrick Wills. And honestly, I love what the Browns have done offensively so far in free agency, adding Austin Hooper, but more importantly, Jack Conklin from the Titans. That's going to be a huge boost to that offensive line, but they still need to keep addressing the line. That's how bad the situation was last year. Go ahead, give as many weapons to protect Baker Mayfield so that you can really see what he has and whether he can be the guy. He's got all the weapons that he could want around him. Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, Odell Beckham, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. It's absolutely ridiculous. Fortify that offensive line and I think the Browns will have a much better year offensively with a bounce back season from Baker Mayfield. Next at number 11, the New York Jets select wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. And for New York, you'd have to think that here at the 11th spot, they're either targeting an offensive lineman or a wide receiver. It's probably going to have a lot to do with what offensive linemen are available, because a lot of people expect there to be a run towards the 8th, 9th, 10th pick around there. But also, it's going to depend on what the Jets do for the remainder of the free agency period, because they've been somewhat quiet so far. They've added a couple offensive linemen here and there, but none of them are key guys, if you will. Whereas on the wide receiver level, they haven't really done anything. They're just in a limbo. So adding Jeudy from that perspective makes a lot of sense. I still have him as my number one wide receiver. What he possesses in terms of route running at a rookie level coming into the NFL, I think is invaluable. And if you want to see what you can get out of Sam Darnold, you need to go ahead and get him some weapons as well. I think Jeudy accomplishes that. Someone that's getting comparisons to Calvin Ridley and route running skills reminiscent of Julio Jones. I think Jeudy is as safe of a wide receiver that you can get. I like him to the New York Jets. Next to number 12, the Las Vegas Raiders select wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. And for the Raiders, the way that I see it, they'll probably go with the best available wide receiver left out of the top two here, whether it's CeeDee Lamb like we have or Jerry Jeudy. I imagine the Raiders will be happy with whatever the result might be, because they need help at that position. They can't have a tight end be their leading wide receiver again. We know how the Antonio Brown fiasco went down. Tyrell Williams isn't really a true number one wide receiver, whereas CeeDee Lamb can be just that. A lot of people have him as their number one wide receiver, like we said. The separation, very small. I think both Lamb and Jeudy will be stud playmakers in the NFL level pretty early on. Exactly what the Raiders need. At number 13, after a free agency trade between the Indianapolis Colts and the San Francisco 49ers that sent DeForest Buckner to Indy, the 49ers are on the clock and select defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. And just like that, the 49ers have the replacement of Buckner. Kinlaw is a guy that could very well be a top 10 pick, whether it's to the Carolina Panthers, maybe to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is someone that is a great value pick here and a younger and, more importantly, cheaper option for the San Francisco 49ers. Don't sleep on wide receiver here either if one of the top two guys are available. But I think because the 49ers have another first-round selection and the wide receiver class is so deep this year that they don't necessarily have to reach on a wide receiver. For that reason, they fortify a hole left after that trade with this selection, Javon Kinlaw, the newest San Francisco 49er. At number 14, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select offensive lineman Andrew Thomas. And boy, get the bandwagons ready in Tampa Bay, because after landing Tom Brady, they've dominated conversation in the NFL nonstop, and with good reason, because all of a sudden the Bucs are now serious playoff contenders. At least that's what the expectation is. Brady has all the weapons in the world that he could want. You could argue this is the best roster of skill guys that he has ever had offensively, especially if the Bucs pick up a true number one running back in free agency on top of that. But because of this signing of Tom Brady, I think the new focal point has to be offensive line. And since this is more of a short-term selection and signing of Brady, I think the strategy shifts for the Bucs here, and it has to be keeping Brady upright, keeping that investment upright. Maybe they've got bigger needs on the defensive side of the football, but if one of these top four offensive linemen is still there, I imagine the Bucs don't hesitate even a single second and rush that card up so they can go ahead and help Tom Brady find all of the targets that he has. Offensive lineman with Brady in Tampa Bay makes all the sense in the world now. At number 15, the Denver Broncos select wide receiver Henry Ruggs. And after the type of 40-yard dash performance that Ruggs had in the combine, don't be surprised if he selected earlier than this because some teams that want a speed demon at the wide receiver position might be looking at precisely him. At this point in time, this pairing between Ruggs and Courtland Sutton to give Drew Lock another weapon makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, give weapons to your young quarterback. Defense is also a possibility, obviously, with the defensive mindset of Vic Fangio and some of the free agent losses like a Chris Harris during free agency that the Broncos have had. So keep an eye out on that if there's an unexpected run on wide receivers. But as of right now, Ruggs is the pick. Next to number 16, the Atlanta Falcons select defensive end Javon Chaisson. And for the Falcons, considering the loss of Vic Beasley and all the issues they've had on the defensive line and on the defensive side of the football in general these last few years, this is a pick that makes a lot of sense. Chaisson is the next best defensive end in the eyes of a lot of scouts after Chase Young. I will say going cornerback here could also be a possibility after the release of Desmond Trufant, but in my eyes, defensive end is a more valuable position. Chaisson is a guy that's slated right around here in terms of draft projection, so not a horrible reach. It's a value pick, and it's at an area of need. Go ahead, mark it down for the Atlanta Falcons. Next at number 17, the Dallas Cowboys select defensive back CJ Henderson. And for Dallas, it sure seems like that this pick will more than likely be one in the secondary, whether it's cornerback or safety, maybe someone like a Xavier McKinney or Grant Delpit. But as of right now, after the recent departure of Byron Jones, who was the number one cornerback on that team and just got paid in free agency by the Dolphins, well, the Cowboys need to do something in terms of his long-term replacement. Enter CJ Henderson, the number 2 defensive back prospect after Jeff Okudah. Younger, cheaper, you get the picture. Plug and play replacement for Dallas. At number 18, the Miami Dolphins select offensive lineman Josh Jones. And let's be honest, the Dolphins could go a number of different ways here. They have a lot of holes. It's not a big surprise that they've been major players in free agency. Sure, they had a lot of money, but they've been using it more so on the defensive side of the football, but also adding Eric Flowers on the offensive line. Sure, that's a nice stepping stone, but I believe adding someone like Josh Jones really helps them take that next step, maybe more so of an investment pick for their young quarterback to be in what everyone assumes Tua Tagovailoa. But right now, I still go with the mindset, if you invest an early pick in a quarterback, you should probably at some point also invest a pick or a signing on the offensive line. This selection does exactly that. At number 19, the Las Vegas Raiders select quarterback Justin Herbert. And if things really do play out like this, well, we might be looking at the steal of the draft. I realize you might be saying there's no way in hell Herbert is still here. He's probably going to be a top 10 pick. Sure, that's a possibility, but if you factor in that we're not having any trades here and the grade that we have on Herbert versus someone like Jordan Love, well, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Herbert is still here for the Raiders, since teams picking before them have either already addressed that in this draft, during free agency, or already had someone on their team. And also taking into account the quarterback situation for the Raiders, well, this pick starts to make more sense, because even though they brought in Marcus Mariota during free agency, that's not a long-term solution. We've seen him and what he can do and his potential in Tennessee. It's not a lot. And then Derek Carr, this is where it gets interesting for the Raiders, because even though a lot of people think that Derek Carr is a serviceable quarterback, well, the commitment isn't there from the Raiders coaching staff, because after all, there's a reason why all that speculation was happening that he might get traded during free agency. As of right now, it hasn't happened, but I imagine if a guy like Justin Herbert, who had a great combine and by a lot of people is regarded as the number 3 quarterback prospect in this draft, is available for the taking, and it could be the guy, his own guy for John Gruden, this would surely be the selection at number 19. At number 20, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Xavier McKinney. And like we said before, this Jacksonville Jaguars team has been absolutely gutted defensively left and right. It's a shell of itself compared to the unit that took the Jaguars on that deep playoff run a few years back. But during this draft in the first round, we're looking at trying to rebuild that group. That's why Isaiah Simmons was the selection earlier on. Now Xavier McKinney to help out in the secondary. The secondary will be a focal point after the loss of A.J. Boye, Jalen Ramsey. Cornerback could also be a selection here very well. Could be. I just happen to have a slightly higher grade on Xavier McKinney than I do on my next best cornerback. Next at number 21, the Philadelphia Eagles select wide receiver Justin Jefferson. Previously here, I was debating between cornerback and wide receiver. I was still giving the edge to wide receiver, but now even more so after the trade for Darius Slay by the Philadelphia Eagles. Justin Jefferson is a wide receiver that had a great combine. His draft stock will go up. Previously, I had him going towards the end of the first round, possibly a second round guy. Now I think he will be in conversation here in the mid-first round, and the Philadelphia Eagles is a great fit. Their wide receivers just couldn't stay healthy last season. We've said it before, and they're just getting older and older by the day. Tough to rely on. You want to go ahead and give this pass-first offense someone to rely on other than their tight ends. Justin Jefferson is a good first step in that plan. At number 22, after a trade between the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills that sent Stefon Diggs to Buffalo, the Vikings are on the clock and select defensive back Trevon Diggs. And immediately, the sentiment will probably be to replace Stefon Diggs in Minnesota. But considering that the Vikings are on the clock, 2 picks after this again, they can afford to wait and instead go best player available. To me, that would be Diggs. It also fits a huge area of need as this secondary will completely be revamped for the Vikings. No more Trey Waynes, no more Xavier Rhodes. You could argue the Vikings could go offensive line as well to try and keep up the investment of Kirk Cousins, who they just gave a 2-year contract extension to. So truly a lot of possibilities for the Vikings, a lot of different directions they could go in. But I imagine with at least one of their first round picks that there will be a cornerback or wide receiver selected. In this case, it's cornerback. Next to number 23, the New England Patriots select linebacker Kenneth Murray. And boy, oh boy, when is the last time that there were so many question marks surrounding the New England Patriots like there are now? But anytime you lose someone like Tom Brady, that is natural. So the question now becomes, what do the Patriots do with this pick? Do they go ahead and invest it in a young quarterback like a Jacob Eason and try and plan for the future? Or maybe they address that during free agency with a quarterback like a Cam Newton or an Andy Dalton or a Jameis Winston. I personally think that that's a more likely scenario. And if anything, taking a quarterback here in the first round would almost signal that the Patriots this year more than likely aren't going to be all that competitive. And as long as Bill Belichick is there, I find that hard to believe. Kenneth Murray is a nice plug-and-play guy after the loss of Van Noy in free agency. Honestly, the Patriots could go a number of different ways here, whether it's linebacker, whether it's offensive lineman, or an outside chance of a quarterback. At this point in time, Murray is my best player available. He fits an area of need for the Patriots as well, so that is the pairing that we have. At number 24, the New Orleans Saints select wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, and for the Saints, we've been saying it for a while, they need to pair up someone opposite Michael Thomas to open things up for Drew Brees down the field additionally, and it's even more so considering that Drew Brees doesn't have all that much left. Sure, Michael Thomas is a great number one, possibly the best wide receiver in the NFL, but they haven't had anyone opposite him in a long time. Don't get me started on Ted Ginn. Jared Cook is a nice piece, but again, in this high explosive offense, it would really be beneficial for a new wide receiver to start coming up. And Ayuk could be that guy. He had a very nice combine. His draft stock is expected to go up. But honestly, when it comes to wide receiver selections at this point in the draft, it comes down to personal preference. It could be anyone from Ayuk to Mims to Higgins to Rieger. So keep that in mind. Right now, I happen to have Ayuk as the fit, but it wouldn't shock me if it's one of those guys that we mentioned. They all make sense. At number 25, the Minnesota Vikings are on the clock again, and this time select wide receiver T. Higgins. And as we mentioned before, after the Stephon Diggs trade, the Minnesota Vikings will probably act pretty quickly in finding his replacement. Now, I realize this is an offense predicated on the run, but having that 1-2 aerial punch for the Vikings offense, and more importantly for Kirk Cousins, was very important. Whether it's T. Higgins or one of these other guys, it's going to come down to personal preference, whether you want someone that's big, physical, red zone threat, a little bit faster, a slot type of wide receiver. It's all on the table. At this point in time, I've got T. Higgins. Whether it's him, I'm not sure, but at some point in time, the Vikings in this first round more than likely will address the wide receiver position. At number 26, the Miami Dolphins, with their third pick in the first round, select running back Jonathan Taylor. And I realize the Dolphins just paid Jordan Howard, but unfortunately for Howard, I think this could be deja vu all over again. Last year it was Philly and Miles Sanders, and this year it could be the Dolphins and Jonathan Taylor. Frankly, Jordan Howard wasn't given a long-term deal with the Dolphins, and Taylor, after his combine and even beforehand, was regarded as more of a complete running back. He is their number one prospect even before the combine, and with the situation being what it is in Miami, it makes a lot of sense to stock up on weapons offensively so that they are available for whenever that franchise quarterback steps in and is handed the reins offensively. So the Dolphins do exactly that with this selection of Taylor. At number 27, the Seattle Seahawks select defensive end AJ Epineza. And for Seattle, this would be an absolute steal, as on talent only a few months ago, AJ Epineza was a surefire top 15 pick. Unfortunately, he didn't blow away anybody at the combine necessarily, while a lot of other individuals did increase their draft stock. So due to that, Epineza sees his draft stock drop a little bit, but that is to the benefit of the Seattle Seahawks. This is an area of need with the expected departure of Jadeveon Clowney. They want to go ahead and reinforce that defensive line. So this is a perfect fit and a potential steal if Epineza is still on the board. Next at number 28, the Baltimore Ravens select linebacker Patrick Queen. And during free agency, the Ravens have actually added some nice defensive pieces, and I believe landing Patrick Queen would be the cherry on top. You could go ahead and argue that the Ravens could go offensive line here with the retirement. However, expected retirement of one Marshall Yanda. The guy was an absolute force and stalwart on the offensive line. The question is, would that necessarily be a reach, or maybe go with someone safer at that linebacker level, which is also an area of need for the Ravens? I've got them doing exactly that with Queen landing in Baltimore. Next at number 29, the Tennessee Titans select defensive end Yetur Gross-Matos. And for the Titans, they could honestly go a number of different directions here. The reason I've got Matos is because I think you can never have enough good edge rushers. Also, even though Matos is a little bit raw, he has great upside. Looking at the other options, however, running back a possibility, since the Titans went ahead and franchise tagged Derrick Henry to kind of ensure themselves in case he threatens to hold out, which we know is something that happens very often with high-end running backs. Also, maybe offensive line with the loss of Conklin. That is a huge loss on that offensive line, which was a big reason why the Titans had so much success, not only in the running game, but also keeping Tannehill upright. I'd love to hear from the Titans fans in terms of what they would like to see their team do. Right now, I've got Matos slated here. At number 30, the Green Bay Packers select wide receiver Jalen Reagor. Previously, I had the Packers going linebacker here if Patrick Queen is available. In the latest mock, that isn't the case. They've gone ahead and lost some guys at the linebacker level, but they've done a decent job replacing them with available free agents. Same at the offensive line after losing Bulaga. So I'm going wide receiver at this point in time. And when it comes to the wide receivers, again, a lot of different directions you can go. Reagor, one of those speed demons, maybe would be a nice complement opposite Devontae Adams to help stretch the field and give more weapons to Aaron Rodgers, who definitely was lacking in that department in 2019. At 31, the San Francisco 49ers select wide receiver Laviska Shenault. And most definitely, there will be a conversation here had about a potential offensive line selection, maybe someone like an Austin Jackson, considering how important it is for that unit to protect Jimmy Garoppolo and set up the rushing attack as well. There's been some losses on that unit on top of that. But the reason I'm going wide receiver is because I think the next best available offensive lineman in Austin Jackson is a little bit more raw, whereas Laviska Shenault offers a unique situation because his draft capital has dropped a little bit because of the core surgery that he had to get after the NFL Combine. But the skill set is undeniable. I think Shenault is a guy that should be going in the 20s, early 20s, if he is healthy. But right now, the 49ers take advantage of this. They don't expect to retain Emmanuel Sanders. So go ahead, plug and play guy from day one in Shenault. And finally, at number 32, the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs select defensive back Kristian Fulton. Now, for the Chiefs, there's a number of different ways they could go here. Potentially wide receiver to replace Sammy Watkins and give yet another weapon to Patrick Mahomes, or maybe on the defensive line to counteract the situation with the franchise tag and Chris Jones. But ultimately, I am going defensive back, specifically cornerback, because outside of the Honey Badger, there are not a lot of names to really hang your hat on here. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, go ahead, improve that secondary a little bit. And then later on in the second round, there should still be some quality talent, especially at the wide receiver position. So with that, we wrap up this Mock Draft 2.0 post-free agency edition. And as always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with these picks? What do you think your teams will do, / what do you want them to do? Two very different things. And finally, as always, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.